The voicemail arrived at 9:14 a.m., a time chosen for efficiency rather than impact. He noticed that first. His father had always preferred mid-morning for unpleasant business, late enough to feel official, early enough to pretend it wasn't emotional. There was no greeting. No pause. "We've decided to cut you off. Don't come to Christmas. This isn't a discussion." The message ended cleanly, like a door closing with practiced restraint. He didn't replay it. He didn't need to. The words sat intact in his head. It filed, already categorized. Not shock. Not grief. Recognition. A quiet alignment between what had been said and what had been true for years. He placed the phone face down on the table and finished his coffee while it was still warm. What surprised him wasn't the exclusion. It was how calm his body felt. No racing pulse, no heat in the chest. Just a slow, almost professional acceptance. The kind he'd learned at work when a contract fell through or a deal come months of pretending it wouldn't. He waited an hour before responding, not to prove anything, simply because he was in the middle of something and didn't feel like being interrupted. When he finally picked the phone back up, he typed, "I appreciate," 2 words, neutral, polite, impossible to argue with. He sent it, then stared at the screen a moment longer than necessary, waiting for the usual aftershock of guilt. It didn't come. Instead, there was something else. A faint, disorienting relief, as if a long-standing obligation had just been formally revoked. By late afternoon, memory started to surface, not in scenes, but in patterns. How he'd been added to the family business account years ago. Temporarily. When they needed an extra signature. How temporary had stretched into years without acknowledgement. How decisions were made without him. But responsibility always seemed to find its way back. He remembered being told, more than once, "You should be grateful to be involved." As if access itself was a gift, not labor. That night, after dinner, he opened his laptop. The login credentials were muscle memory. He hadn't touched the account in weeks, but nothing had changed. His name still sat there alongside theirs, neat and official, conferring authority he'd never been allowed to exercise. He didn't rush. He read through the permissions carefully, the way he did everything now. Then, without drama, he removed himself. No note. No warning. No announcement. It felt less like revenge, and more like correcting a clerical error that had been allowed to linger out of habit. He closed the laptop and slept better than he had in months. The next morning unfolded normally. He went to work, answered emails, bought groceries on the way home. It wasn't until early afternoon that he noticed the missed calls, 14 at first, then 23. Numbers stacked in tight clusters, all from home. He didn't listen to the voicemails yet. He wasn't avoiding them, he just didn't feel pulled toward them. There was a strange steadiness in the silence, like standing on ground that no longer shifted under someone else's feet. By evening, the count had climbed past 50. He finally listened while making dinner, the phone propped against the counter like an appliance. The first voicemail was brisk, confused rather than upset. His father's voice, clipped, asking if there had been some kind of mistake. The second introduced urgency. The third irritation. By the 10th, his mother was speaking, her tone sharp with disbelief. They talked about access. About deadlines. About how things couldn't just be changed without discussion. Not once did they mention Christmas. He turned the phone off halfway through and finished cooking in silence. The external shift arrived the next morning, quiet and unmistakable. An automated message from the bank. A compliance notification. Polite language informing all parties that recent changes had triggered a review. Followed shortly by an email from a business partner, cautiously worded, asking who now had authority to sign. He hadn't alerted anyone. He hadn't threatened anything. The system simply responded to the truth he'd finally made official. By midday, the voicemails changed shape. His father no longer sounded in control. Sentences overlapped. Words were repeated, as if repetition itself could restore leverage. There was frustration now, edged with something closer to fear. Late afternoon brought a message from a lawyer's assistant, requesting clarification on representation. That was when he replied, "For the first time since I appreciate." His response was brief and formal. He confirmed that he was no longer involved and redirected all inquiries appropriately. No accusations, no family language, just process. The calls intensified after that. By midnight, there were 84 missed calls. The last voicemail came just after 1:30 a.m. His father sounded different, older. Not authoritative. Not strategic. Tired in a way that hadn't been audible before. "Call us back," he said. "We need to talk. Not about the business. Just as family." The word landed strangely, as if it had been borrowed from someone else's vocabulary. He listened to the message all the way through, then set the phone down. He didn't delete anything. He didn't respond. He simply left it there, the way one leaves an object that has finally revealed what it is and no longer needs to be examined. The next days were quieter. Fewer calls. Then none. The system adjusted. Other people filled the gaps he'd quietly vacated. He noticed how often peace looked like absence. There was no triumph. No satisfaction sharp enough to call joy. Just a calm, grounded sense of dignity returning, unannounced. They had taken access from him and mistaken it for control. He had given it back and discovered something steadier underneath. When Christmas came, he spent it elsewhere. Not defiantly. Not sadly. Just elsewhere, and for the first time, that felt like his choice.